So let me just jump right in. You're reporting on David Tepper's role in the benching of Bryce Young. Did he have one? Is that naive to even wonder if he had one? Albert,
Yes.
what can you tell me about that?
So I don't think he pushed the button on this one. Um, I think this has more to do with how Bryce was playing, but are they always aware of what he wants? Yes. And I think like anything else in any other workplace, you sort of, if you have an idea of what your boss wants, then maybe, you act accordingly sometimes. Look, like I think as much as anything else, Rich, if you want me to take you through like kind of what some of the other teams have seen when they've gone against him, the Chargers, the Saints, like the Raiders, and looking at tape of him this week, there are a few things that really stick out. Number one, he's not pushing the ball downfield at all. Number two, it doesn't look like he's able to see the middle of the field, which could relate to his height. And number three, his eyes are dropping. And this is the real death knell for a quarterback, right? When you start looking at the rush and you're starting to worry about getting hit, like NFL people will tell you you're kind of done. And so the guy that they all saw in college, the guy with the fast eyes, the quick processor, that all looks like it's gone right now. So I think that leads to two reasons, if you're Dave Canales, why you make this decision. Number one, it's probably not best for Bryce to be out there if that's what's happening, right? And then number two, you're a first-year coach who's 2 games in. Can you sell Bryce Young being the best option for your team? Because here's the thing. A veteran player does not care, and you know this as well as I do. 80 to 90% of the guys on every roster don't know what team they're going to be on next year. So they don't care about your 3-year plan. And you have to have a quarterback in there who you can sell to the rest of the roster and can sell as like, this guy is going to help you have individual success, which will help you get paid. This guy's going to help us win. You have to be able to sell a quarterback to the roster. So I think it's those two things. Number one, is it best for Bryce to be out there? And then number two, can they sell Bryce as the best option? And I think over the first 2 weeks, maybe they got to the point where they couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, and the concept of David Tepper ordered the code red that I'm hearing a lot from, just because it does dovetail in with an impetuous decision or a decision an owner shouldn't be making because he should be delegating to football guys. It doesn't make sense, right? Like, this has been such a major decision for this franchise. I mean, Caleb Williams and DJ Moore are catching passes for Chicago right now because of it, and so on and so forth. And it makes no sense to say to the coach that I'm assuming got hired because he said, I've got this with Bryce, to say, you've got to play Andy Dalton right now because I'm sick and tired of hearing from my friends, why aren't you winning? That just doesn't make sense to me.
No, especially after you're like largely responsible for the investment. Like some of the people that were making that call, in trading up, Frank Reich, Scott Fitter, who was the general manager there, those guys are gone now, So who's left? Well, Dan Morgan, the GM, was there. So, he's got some blood on his hands over that decision, and David Tepper. So you would think if this was about David Tepper and David Tepper alone, he would want to try his best to see this thing through and like be right on it ultimately.
So then the question I have for this too is, was there consensus about Bryce Young, or is this just revisionist history because the other quarterback is a unicorn in Houston right now with MVP and Super Bowl possibility status written all over him, Albert?
I don't want to tell you that there's any sort of like knockdown drag out over it, but I also don't think that every single person in that building viewed Bryce Young as the best option. I think there was support for CJ Stroud. Now, with a call like this, it'd almost be weird if there wasn't. So I don't want to paint it as some sort of unusual thing, but I can tell you there were people in that building who supported the idea of CJ Stroud over Bryce Young. Obviously not enough of it, though.
So are those people still in the building? Or
that I don't know for sure.
Okay.
That I don't know for sure. But I mean, obviously some of them are. Some of the people, who worked on the scouting side are still there. most prominently, again, Dan Morgan, who is the assistant general manager. Um, I do think Dan Morgan was somebody who was behind the Bryce Young pick. Like, he supported the Bryce Young pick. I think that might have been a factor in him becoming the general manager, was that, he was as invested in Bryce Young. And, the owner, one thing he did here, it was sort of an interesting nuance to this whole thing, right? Like, I can remember going back to the spring of 2023, there was, I think, only one of the pro days that Nicole Tepper attended. I think she was at the dinner with all the quarterbacks, but as far as like the actual pro day practices or the pro day workouts, like, she was on the field for the pro day workout of Bryce Young. I don't think she was at the other pro day workouts, like the workout itself, which I thought was, an interesting piece of context when we find when you have the final result, and kind of maybe shows you where David Tepper's head was at with this.
Well, I mean, listen, I'll be honest with you. If I'm making a major decision like that, I'm going to have my whole family meet the guy. You know what I mean? Like, I want to make sure that he's, the right person, neck up, heartbeat, the whole thing, and how he is around other people and my members of my family. I definitely would want to see all that. But again, I just don't know what's revisionist history and what's not, because there's no equivalency. We've never seen anything like this before.
Well,
right?
Tua.
But Tua wasn't first overall, man. And,
no, but Tua was the top. Tua was what the fifth pick, and like, they yo-yoed him in and out of the lineup those first 2 years with Flores, which is where the problem was, right?
Right.
So I think it has happened before. And it's sort of interesting too, because it's like, I think the questions with Bryce were similar to the questions with Tua, right? Like, is he too physically limited to play the position at a high level in the pros? So sort of interesting there. That would be the one parallel, but there's not a lot. I mean, like, look, like most teams, I mean, and this is the interesting thing about it to me, right? Is like, I've been asked a lot the last couple of days, like, okay, like, well, are they going to put him back in there? Well, if Andy Dalton plays well, no. Right. And if this was a bad situation for him and Andy Dalton doesn't play well, then maybe the situation was part of Andy Dalton not playing well. And then do you want to put him back in there into a situation that got him in this circumstance in the first place? This to me is why you see it, why it almost never happens, right? Like, why it almost never happens that you see a guy who was drafted that high at that position pulled out of the lineup. Is like, part of it is like, well, like, how do where's the reentry point? Like, how do we go back on this? Like, and so, when these questions come up, do we ride it out or do we sit the guy down? A lot of times, like, one thing that can kind of carry the day with those conversations is, where's the reentry point? Is there one? How do you stick the guy back in there? Because one or two things are going to happen. Either the situation remains bad and Andy Dalton pays the price that Bryce Young paid. And so then is it right for Bryce Young to go back into the situation that, contributed to this in the first place? Or Andy Dalton plays really well, and in that circumstance, I mean, if you're serving the rest of the team, you don't pull him out, right? Like, if you're Dave Canales again, in your first year as a head coach, and Andy Dalton plays really well, like, how can you look the other 51 guys in the locker room in the eye and tell them we're doing the right thing when you're sticking Bryce Young back in there?
Albert Breer here in advance of Prime Video's Thursday night broadcast. He's part of it between the Jets and the Patriots, and from Sports Illustrated right here on the Rich Eisen Show once again. So the Steelers quarterback situation is one of those questions where, how long do you go with one? And the only issue, it seems, is the other quarterback, as Mike Tomlin points out, the veteran in Russell Wilson, isn't available because he's not ready to practice fully, unless that's just something that he's saying while he's waiting for Justin Fields to really push the pedal to the metal here. Like, what's your sense of what is happening in Western PA in advance of 2-0 teams, Chargers, Steelers, playing each other this weekend?
They love Justin Fields personally. I can tell you that. Like, they really like coaching him. They really like working with him. And I think you've conversed with Justin some too, right, Rich? Like, he is a Steeler. You know what I mean? Like, and I know that sounds weird for a guy who's been there for 6 months, but like, he really kind of has the makeup and the demeanor of a Pittsburgh Steeler. So he's fit in really well. Like, has he played at an A+ level? No. But, I do think that staff and, Arthur Smith worked with Ryan Tannehill and basically resurrected Ryan Tannehill's career in Tennessee. Um, I think that they feel like they could and Arthur and his staff feel like they could even do more with Justin Fields than they did with Ryan Tannehill. And they got to an AFC championship game with Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. So to me, I look at this like the more chances Justin gets to improve week over week, the stronger the case becomes to leave him in there. And, I think there are some limitations to Russell Wilson's game at this stage that Justin Fields doesn't have. So this was a very real conversation in the summer. There's a reason why Mike Tomlin didn't make the decision until right before week one. And I do think that the longer Justin stays in there, and he doesn't even need to be a superstar, the more he shows progress week over week, and he showed progress week 2 over week 1, the more he shows progress week over week, the greater the case becomes for him to stay in there. Now, the one thing about it, and I think this is another thing that's sort of a twist to the way you handle this, is if Russell's not going to be the starter, can you keep him on the roster? And if you have to make that switch from Justin to Russell, can you do it? Whereas if you put Russell back in there when he's ready to go, it'd be very easy for you to switch back if it doesn't work, right? So I think that's one nuance. And I think that was a nuance to the initial decision too, where the initial decision with part of it was, well, if we start with Russell and it doesn't work, it'd be really easy to go to Justin. Whereas if we start with Justin, can Russell even be on the roster? That was part of their decision making. I think that exists now too, where it's, if they give Russell a shot, maybe they get great play out of him, but if they don't, it'd be really easy to just go back to Justin.
I don't usually ask you what's at stake questions, Albert, but what's at stake with the Ravens and Cowboys playing each other this weekend?
A lot, I would say. I think the Ravens are going to come out of it regardless. It's just the strength of their program. I mean, it's what John Harbaugh's built there over nearly 2 decades. There's been a lot of transition on the roster, this year. And so you lose Mike Macdonald. And I reminded people this week, Zach Orr is really well thought of as their new defensive coordinator. And they picked him over maybe making a run at getting Jesse Minter away from John's brother. Jesse obviously worked with John in Baltimore before he ever went to Michigan. Anthony Pleasant, was another choice that they had. He winds up going to Miami to be the defensive coordinator. Denard Wilson is now the defensive coordinator in Tennessee. So they picked Zach Orr over a lot of guys that were well thought of. Go back and look at Mike Macdonald's second game in 2022 when he came over from Michigan, right? Mike Macdonald and his defense got lit up for 42 points and over 500 yards in Miami. And there were a lot of these same narratives out there about Mike that you hear about Zach Orr now, which is did they make the right choice? I'd say Mike Macdonald worked out pretty well over time. So that's one piece of it. And then there's the guys in the roster, right? So Patrick Queen's gone, Trenton Simpson's in there. They think he's going to be an upgrade eventually. Is he right away? Maybe not. On the offensive line, they say goodbye to 60% of that offensive line this offseason. John Simpson's gone. Kevin Zeitler's gone. Morgan Moses is gone. They think over time, Andrew Voorhees, Daniel Falele, and Roger Rosengarten are going to be upgrades. But, in the immediate aftermath, sometimes there's a little bit of an adjustment period. So I think the Ravens are going to be okay. And I think it's about those young players getting their feet underneath them and the new defensive coordinator getting more comfortable. The Cowboys are massively interesting now because we've seen one really impressive week and we've seen one really awful week. So who are they? With everything that team's been through over the last, couple months with CD's contract, with Dak's contract, Mike McCarthy being in his contract situation. Obviously, there've been noise about Micah Parsons and his contract. I'm going to just be really interested to see how that team handles having gotten punched in the mouth by a Saints team that's playing really, really well. And I think going and having to play the Ravens in week 3. A Ravens team is desperate for a win to be a really, really great litmus test.
I can't wait for that. You're not wrong. So before I let you go, the usual, what am I not asking you? What are you hearing that is interesting to you that would be of interest to me and the rest of everybody who's watching and listening? I'm just going macro here.
I just love what's happening with the Chargers, don't you? I mean, and I'm not even saying this in any Michigan,
No,
Ohio
I know
State
that.
way,
Yeah.
but like, I mean, it's sort of like I look at like Dan Campbell and the Lions. Like when Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes got there, they told us exactly what they were going to build, and they did it, right? Jim Harbaugh, I think the number, I have the number. I wish I had it right in front of me, but they're at like over their last 6 quarters, the Chargers are averaging something like 6.4 yards per carry. That's freaking outrageous. Like that they're able to do that. And they haven't even like really pulled the lever of like needing Justin Herbert to be Superman yet, right? And so like Jim Harbaugh, like we knew what he was going to build and he's done it and it's happening this quickly. And I think like the J.K. Dobbins thing is such an just such an interesting like parallel to what happened in San Francisco, where in San Francisco he had this injury prone back, right? And Frank Gore, who became like kind of like the bellwether for the entire offense and like the heartbeat of the team, right? Like Frank Gore, and you remember that, Rich, like
Mm-hmm.
Frank Gore was the heartbeat of that team. And now you get to see like J.K. Dobbins, who's been through injury issues just like Frank Gore. Frank Gore's was earlier in his, in his football life. Like most of that was in college. With J.K. Dobbins, it's happened as a pro. But, now they've got like sort of their Frank Gore story there. God, I mean, it's just, and the defense is playing really well under Jesse Minter. It's a really, really cool thing to see because again, it's like that's a team being built and it's happening the way that Jim Harbaugh had told us it was all going to be built, which is really cool to see. I also think Matt LaFleur deserves a ton of credit for what's happening in Green Bay right now.
No doubt.
20 carries and for like 150 yards in the first quarter when you didn't have Jordan Love and everybody is at Lambeau Field up to like the very top of the stands knew exactly what they had to do to win that game, right? With Malik Willis as the quarterback, a guy who's been on the team for 3 weeks. And to be able to win that way was so freaking impressive, Like, and to be able to come out of the Brazil trip that way. And, it just, I think you can be really excited about where the Packers are going and the job Matt LaFleur has done. I don't think he's gotten anywhere near the amount of credit for the job that he's done going back to when he got named the coach there in 2019, managing the Rodgers thing. Like, I think he's responsible for Rodgers being able to get his final 4 years there, right? Like that thing was held together for 4 years. I think is a large part due to like Matt LaFleur's people skills. And now we see his acumen as a football coach. He's just, I mean, I think it's like just so cool to see how he's become this like complete head coach there in Green Bay. And I think it really showed on Sunday and being able to win the way they were able to win.
And Love looks like it's sooner rather than later, right? I mean, he got back out there.
I think so. It was interesting. Like last week, like I don't think they didn't think he was going to play, but they wanted to keep it alive for long enough. Like let's see, you know what I mean? And I think that's sort of the idea with him being week to week now is like, do they think he's going to play this week? Maybe not, but like they want to at least give him the chance to be out there. And I think like one of the cool things, I talked to Malik Willis after the game on Sunday, and it was really cool hearing him. Like now he and Jordan Love have the same agent, David Mulugeta, and they've gotten to get to know each other pretty well over the years through that. And then, Malik Willis also has a relationship with Sean Clifford, who they have the same quarterback trainer. So Malik was telling me how like the environment in that quarterback room has really helped him and really helped him get ready to play in this game because those guys were really helping him. So I thought it was awesome how like Jordan Love is like trying to make a case to play and trying to get himself in position to play in a football game and prove to his coaches that he can play. And at the same time, being such a great resource to a guy who's only been there for 3 weeks. Again, I think it kind of shows the importance of the relationships in that building and how they've been such a major part of what Matt LaFleur has built there over the last 5 years.
Yeah, man. I hear you. Great stuff there. And just, going out the door, you said Harbaugh is something of interest to you and, no Michigan, Ohio State thing aside. And just to pay it right back to you, C.J. Stroud's an MVP candidate, sir. And the way I'm looking at the Texans, we were talking about it the other day here on the show. They look like the AFC 49ers right now. That's what they kind of look like as they're beginning to ascend. Like they're going to hit you in the mouth. They got weapons everywhere, and you could absolutely make the case, and Purdy I love, that, they have a better quarterback. I mean, this kid's unbelievable, Albert. He is spectacular.
This was so cool. This is years ago. Like I had someone tell me, give me this, like I was doing like a free agency rules column, right? And, he gave me the Alvin Harper rule. And the Alvin Harper rule was basically don't take somebody else's number 2 and project them to be your number 1, right? Like Alvin Harper was a fantastic number 2 next to Michael Irvin in Dallas, but it didn't work out when he became a number 1 in Tampa. And there's tons of examples of those over the years. What I love about what the Texans did this offseason, Nick Caserio deserves some credit for this. They went out and they got somebody else's number 1 pass rusher in Danielle Hunter and somebody else's number 1 receiver in Stephon Diggs. Mm-hmm. And now those 2 number 1s are not being asked to be number 1s there, which is such a cool element to, seeing how Stephon Diggs is fitting in, seeing how Danielle Hunter's fitting in. To me, Danielle Hunter, right? Like the way he and Will Anderson looked on Sunday night, they looked spectacular. I don't think that was all the Bears' offensive line being terrible. I think that was what looks like the makings of an elite pass rush. So I'll bring that back to CJ in that he's on his rookie contract and you've got this window to take advantage of it. And for them to be adding guys like Stephon Diggs and Danielle Hunter to that mix, I don't know, man. I don't know if they can challenge the Chiefs, but CJ looks like a really, really special player. And it looks like that Georgia game at the end of his career at Ohio State has carried over and a switch flipped, and that's who he is now. And we're seeing it on a week-to-week basis. The way he keeps growing, the way he's handling the job of being a franchise quarterback, it's really cool to watch that. And then just seeing the way that so many of the young players who've come up together, like your Nico Collins, there's your Wolverine, your Nico Collins, your Tank Dell, the way those guys are coming together, Will Anderson. And then you have guys who have real skins in the wall and Stephon Diggs and Danielle Hunter, in the mix. It's just, I can't wait to see what that team becomes in November and December.
Man, I love it. Nico Collins catching passes for C.J. Stroud, Joey Bosa, and J.K. Dobbins winning games for Harbaugh like cats and dogs playing together. Albert,
I will give you one thing from that week 1, too. Go back, and I think this was the most underrated play from week 1. On the 3rd and 11, the throw and catch from C.J. Stroud and Nico Collins to put away the Colts. That was a championship play by both players, right? That was our coaches trust us in the situation not to play it tight and run the ball. We're going to go win the game right now. And CJ made the throw and Nico made the catch. And it was just that play. I think if we're deep in January and the Texans are still playing, I think we're going to be able to go back and look at that play as that was a play right there that was a championship play that we could have marked that team back in September. So love where the Texans are. And yeah, with the Chargers and the Texans, we got lots of cats and dogs working together for sure.
Playing together, winning together. Albert, have a great broadcast tonight on Prime Video, sir. We'll see you then.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich.
That's Appreciate Albert Breer, Prime Videos. You bet. Albert Breer for Prime Video, Jets and Patriots tonight. And, of course, his MMQB can't miss of Sports Illustrated. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku Channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.